on to our next module, which is going to be looking at morphologies of suspicious calcifications, and again, how we can use that information with the distribution to appropriately recognize calcifications that need biopsy. So here from our BI-RADS manual, you see this area that reviews the suspicious morphologies. I've included round because we're going to talk a little bit about when round calcifications, even though they tend to be benign, may need biopsy. And we're going to talk about coarse heterogeneous calcifications, amorphous calcifications, fine pleomorphic calcifications, and fine linear branching calcifications. And these are in order from most benign to most suspicious. So round calcifications we talked about earlier. These are small, round, or punctate and are typically benign, but assessment is going to depend on the distribution. Like we talked about in the special cases, they may be considered benign when diffuse and small. An isolated group may warrant a probably benign assessment and surveillance if no priors are available. However, if round or punctate calcifications are new, increasing, or in a linear or segmental distribution or adjacent to known cancer, they require biopsy. So again, although round is typically benign based on its morphology, we truly need to also assess the distribution in order to come to an appropriate assessment and management recommendation. So let's take a look again. Here is our group of round punctate calcifications. That again, if that was on a baseline, we could give that a BI-RADS 3. Here we have diffuse bilateral calcifications would be a BI-RADS 2. On the baseline, again, a BI-RADS 3. However, when these are in a linear distribution, as we have here, even though the morphology is suggestive of a benign process, as we just reviewed, the linear distribution has a PPV for malignancy around 60%. So therefore, despite the morphology, that distribution is so suspicious that we need to recommend biopsy, and we give this a BI-RADS 4 assessment. And when we look at this chart from BI-RADS, just looking at the PPVs for malignancy of these suspicious calcifications, we see that coarse heterogeneous calcifications has a PPV of around 13%, amorphous 21%, fine pleomorphic 29%, and fine linear branching calcifications are very suspicious. The PPV for malignancy has been shown to be about 70%. So let's take a look at some of these types of calcifications. Again, we've seen a few examples of these coarse heterogeneous calcifications, but these are defined as irregular, conspicuous calcifications that are greater than 0.5 millimeter in size. They are of intermediate concern. The vast majority of these are going to be benign, such as we've seen in fibroadenomas, traumas, early dystrophic calcifications, or areas of fibrosis. However, cancer, and particularly DCIS, is in your differential, and that's why this morphology is suspicious. Like we talked about in the for special cases section, numerous bilateral groups of coarse heterogeneous calcifications may be dismissed as benign, but baseline magnification views may be helpful, and the rest require biopsy. So here's an example of a single group of coarse heterogeneous calcifications. Again, these should get a BI-RADS 4, a suspicious assessment, and we should recommend biopsy. Again, these are irregular, conspicuous. They're very easy to see, larger calcifications. Here's another example of coarse heterogeneous calcifications. Again, a suspicious morphology. A single group, again, it has a PPV of slightly less than 15%. So some people like to divide the subtype of BI-RADS into 4A, B, and C, 4C having the most likelihood of being cancer, the highest probability of cancer in that group, 4A the lowest, and 4B intermediate. So moving on, we also see amorphous calcifications. These are calcifications that we see in the breast that are so small and or hazy that they may be hard to see. It's very hard to define an exact particle size or shape. These are of intermediate concern, and the assessment depends on distribution. Like we talked about in the 4 special cases, bilateral diffuse amorphous calcifications may be dismissed as benign, but the rest require biopsy. So here's some nice examples of amorphous calcifications. Again, you're looking, they're very hard to see, but here we see them. They're amorphous, they're fuzzy, and these are a BI-RADS 4. Again, diffuse or bilateral, they can be dismissed as benign, but grouped, linear, or segmental amorphous calcifications require biopsy. So again, just reinforcing that we always need to look at both our morphology and distribution together, and not just look at morphology or just distribution, because the information from both is what gets us to our appropriate assessment. Fine pleomorphic calcifications, these are calcifications that are small, of variable sizes and shapes. They have a high probability of malignancy. Here's an example of a group of fine pleomorphic calcifications. So these are small, like amorphous, but unlike amorphous, these are going to be much more easy to see, as demonstrated here. And this would be a BI-RADS 4, a suspicious finding, and we would recommend biopsy for these small, easy to see calcifications that vary in size and shape. And again, their PPV, or positive predictive value for malignancy, is around 29%. Moving on to the most suspicious morphology for calcifications in the breast are fine linear branching calcifications. These are thin, linear, or curvilinear, irregular calcifications that result from the filling of a lumen of a duct by a cancer, and these have a high probability of malignancy. Here we see fine linear branching calcifications in a linear distribution, and these are a suspicious finding. Another example of fine linear calcifications, a very suspicious finding. They have the highest PPV of malignancy of 70%, therefore a BI-RADS 4C, the highest probability of malignancy of all the morphologies of breast calcifications. So very important to recognize that type of calcifications. So in in this lecture, we've gone over the pathogenesis of breast calcifications. What are they, where are they, and why we care about them. We've gone over how we can use a logical approach to evaluating all calcifications in the breast and coming to an appropriate assessment and management. We reviewed a long list of characteristically benign calcifications that don't require biopsy, 4 special cases, and how we can use BI-RADS rules to determine if all the rest need biopsy. So I want to thank you so much for your attention.